If you have a hard time with boundaries, how might your life be different if you could say no as easily as a joyful yes? I'm Love Coach Mariya, and for over a decade now, I've been encouraging folks to empower their compassion so it's big enough for ourselves as well as others, and so our boundaries can become healthier than ever. You're listening to Empower Your Compassion, and on this show, we'll be unlocking transformative insights to help you reconnect to your true yes, so you can say no from that more expansive energy and get more of what you want in your relationships and your life without sacrificing your compassion. Are you ready for more love? Let's grow. Welcome back to the show. Today I'm delighted to introduce you to my new friend Jess Sargus. She's a self-leadership and high-performance evangelist with a background as an Ivy League lawyer and an undefeated MMA fighter. She's now a keynote speaker and workshop facilitator who blends neuroscience, sports psychology, and decades of experience in high-stakes legal and business roles to help folks not just live their lives, but lead them. She's also the creator of Fierce Agency, her science-backed self-leadership framework, and the subject of her forthcoming book that helps high-achieving professionals learn to think like elite athletes and become the best leader they've ever had. Please join me in welcoming her to the show. Welcome, Jess. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. I'm delighted for our conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here, Mariya.
Wonderful. So when we spoke before, I got the sense that a lot of your journey has been, you've faced a lot of like naysayers, people who maybe weren't fully supportive of what you were doing. And I like to talk about boundaries in the sense of it's not just about learning how to say no, but it's about reconnecting to your yes and letting your no like support the yes. So I imagine you got really good at that.
Yeah.
What comes up for you with that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's boundaries are so important. And that's exactly the way that I like to talk about them is that boundaries are what allow you to say yes to what is most important by saying no to the things that are not your priorities, and that you don't need to apologize for that, for saying yes to the things that you want to say yes to.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's been a lot of that in my life because I've taken some turns that no one understood at the time. Sometimes that even I didn't fully understand. I just knew it was a direction that I needed to go. Probably the most dramatic turn was when, after 12 years of practicing as a corporate defense litigation attorney, I left my job in Philadelphia. I sold my business at the time, and I moved to Las Vegas to be a full-time mixed martial arts fighter. So that one, the parents were scratching their heads about quite a lot. I invested an awful lot into a legal career, and it was a successful legal career. But at that time in my life, with the limited window of prime athletic years, I really felt like that was the thing that I needed to do. And there were a lot of reasons why the particular type of law that I was doing no longer felt aligned with who I was and who I wanted to help. So, making that leap and that shift and that drawing that boundary that this was no longer the set of golden handcuffs I wanted to accept in my life. I wanted to branch out and explore and grow in an entirely new way. Was probably the biggest no I've
Mhm.
ever said, and the biggest yes.
So I'm curious about the process for you, the experience of finding that yes, because like, I mean, other people might have just picked a different area of law or something, but
Yeah,
how did
you might think
you
that.
how did you find that yes? First, so it's a two-part question. How did you find that yes? And what did you have to do like internally to really commit to that despite the, unconventionality of the choice?
There's a couple of big things I think that come up with that. One part of it was leaning into the things that I found lit me up. And that was the sport, that was feeling strong and capable. It was wanting to test myself and see what I really am capable of doing beyond what I thought my limitations were, what kind of box I thought I had to live in, and really start blazing my own path. So that was the first part, was listening to what lit me up inside, what felt right. And then a really big part of it also is we tend not to change unless the discomfort of staying the same is greater than the discomfort of change, because change is hard and it's painful and it's scary and uncertain. And so there was a lot of pain at that point of how I was living my life and the kind of ways that I was spending a lot of my time. So both of those things, I think, combined with both this is what I want to say no to, and this is what feels really good to say yes to, played huge roles in that. I also, at the time I was married and my partner was fully in the fight world. He was a professional coach. He was my coach. And so of course he was all for this this enterprise. So having that kind of encouragement and support really was a big part of that as well. I don't know if I was on my own at that moment if I would have made such a big leap, but having someone that I was making the leap with really helped as well.
Yeah. Having people in your corner is so important.
Yes.
Along my journey, I've developed, it kind of like got pieced together little by little, but eventually I kind of saw it coming together and was able to sort of articulate what it was. And eventually I named it my peaceful power practice. And I determined that there were like 5 key elements of it, like self-reflection and study and etc. But one of them that's really important is that support, like having people in our lives that we're safe to be ourselves with, that will cheerlead us. Of course, that will call us out on our BS too, but at the same time, without like a lot of judgment or criticism, like that sort of unconditional love is really important.
Yeah, and I will say this also about my parents, who are still my closest confidants and biggest supporters, that even though they really didn't understand what it was that I was doing, they gave me their unconditional support. They said, "We're here for you. We
We
believe
don't
in
get
you.
it,
We don't
but
get it. We want you to be safe. We don't know about this cage fighting stuff, but we're here for you." And so
that's
that
awesome.
is, always has been, and continues to be a really big part of my support, and my support system at that time, that pivotal moment, and throughout, and many other pivotal moments since.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, one of the things I teach my clients in developing healthy boundaries is the Gates method. It's just a process I've created that helps people, especially who are really disconnected from their own needs and limits, um, reconnect to those and be able to kind of check in with them before they like say a yes or no to something, so that their response is, more authentically aligned instead of like a fawning response. And the first step of the Gates method is ground in your body and your values. And it sounds like you have had some really wonderful anchors in that regard. But I also noticed that one of the reasons that the G grounding is the first step is because our culture is so disconnected from our bodies.
Mhm.
And we really live in the mind a lot, and the mind is really addicted to having our attention on it. And it doesn't it protests a bit, when we're like, oh, I'm gonna ignore you for a little bit and just hang out in my body. And I'm noticing also that your shift from the legal realm, which is very mental and sort of masculine yang energy, and then shifting into the body more. And granted, most people would associate MMA as like a masculine thing, but in terms
Yeah.
of the physicality of it, there is a lot of feminine yin energy in being in the body. Do you think that there was some like part of what felt good in that transition was the embodiment aspect?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mentioned that feeling empowered and powerful while I was practicing the martial arts and
Mhm.
training is a huge part of what I think built not just, my being in touch with my body necessarily, but also my self-efficacy and self-confidence in that our brains don't really know the difference between I can lift something big and heavy and I can go through something emotionally big and heavy. It's hard stuff to
Mhm.
the brain. And the use of muscle versus mental muscle, it doesn't signify. So I think having built that brain grit muscle, that mid-cingulate cortex of going through hard things, on top of being in my body for so much of the day, I think was a huge asset in grounding myself. I think that being physical, however physicality feels good to you, is a really critical part of being an active leader for your life. It's an essential part of what I call the elite athlete mindset. But it's a part of the system that I speak about and that I teach about is it's very important for you to have these moments of movement to get yourself grounded and into your body. You don't have to be stationary, sitting by a creek and meditating at the time, although that is one of my favorite ways that I personally ground. But any kind of movement, walking, just stretching, anything that gets you back in touch with yourself is such a huge part of that. And I've spoken a lot about how I came to combat sports originally in law school. My friend took me to a boxing class in my first year of law school. In the first year of law school, everything is up here. You are so in your head constantly. It is hugely stressful. And with law school classes, a lot of people might not know this, your entire grade is one test at the end of the semester. That's your full grade. And so you don't know how you're doing the rest of the semester. There's no way to possibly improve your grade throughout that semester. And so it's just a ton of reading and a ton of learning and trying to do something you've never done before, which is think like a lawyer and then take tests like a lawyer. And so my way of getting back in touch with myself and stress relief was that discovery of boxing because it was my moment of zen. And it's fun to, to tell people that punching things really hard is your zen moment. But when you're practicing something like a martial art where it's mental and physical, you cannot be thinking about anything else but what you're doing in that moment. How am I punching this bag? Where am I punching this? How am I moving my body? And so you are forced to be grounded in your body in that moment. And it is such a liberating feeling that it becomes very attractive, very, very meaningful. You keep wanting those moments of Zen because it is such freedom from the overthinking and the overanalysis and the stress that comes with living up here before we get grounded into the rest of our bodies.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so I also know that you are in the final stages of launching your first book called Fierce Agency, and that you also provide leadership coaching as well and like self-leadership, which I just adore that concept. It really aligns with my philosophies and boundaries and self-care is relational care, etc. But tell me a little bit more about what inspired the book and what it's about.
Sure. The book is called Fierce Agency: How to Be the Best Leader You've Ever Had. And I have many books in mind, but this one is the foundation because I'm talking about the foundations of the Fierce Agency system I've developed, which is a core set of mindset practices and habits that allow you to be the best leader for yourself. And I start there because before we can lead others, before we can attempt to impact things externally, we have to be in control of ourselves. We have to be leaders of ourselves so that we can move intentionally. We can be more aligned between what our ideal life looks like and what the steps and actions are that we're actually taking every day. So, self leadership is the first start of that. And it's important, even if you don't lead a team, even if you're not an executive, anything, because self leadership, again, it's how we move through the world every day. And it's looking inward, grounding again, what feels true, authentic, and important to me, and then proceeding accordingly. So, fierce agency, I have my 5 pillars of fierce agency set out, as well as other supportive practices that really help to have folks thinking about how not only to generate energy for this big mission in life, but also how to restore your energy in a natural and authentic way. So there's a lot of additional practices and exercises that you can do with a journal or just thinking about it, that support your ability to practice these 4 mindsets. That a boxing coach of mine once said, It's simple, but it ain't easy." They're very simple, but they take practice, daily practice, in order to really become part of how you live your life. So I'm hoping that everyone will enjoy the book, will read it, and will start day one trying to practice these things each day.
That's awesome. Yeah, it sounds very practical as well as transformative. So thank you for, the labor of love that went into creating that and bringing it to the world.
Sure. It was, I had in mind that I was going to write this book sometime in the next 5 years. And I was preparing for a workshop. And one of the women who was going to attend the workshop asked if there was something that she could read to prepare. And at that moment, I wished I had this book out there for her to recommend, because what I was doing instead was, okay, well, there's this book and it has this piece that's really great. And then there's that book and there's that piece. And there was no single place that I could point to that to give her the foundation I really wanted her to be able to have. So that put my butt in gear to actually start making it happen now, this time, rather than when I felt like it was time or felt like I was fully ready. It's part of the fierce agency practices is start before you're fully ready, because you're amazing at what can happen when you simply just put things in motion.
Absolutely. Hey friends, real quick, in case you're busy, which you probably are if you have a hard time with boundaries, I just wanted to make sure you know that you can go to boundariesthatfeelgood.com and download a free resource for making boundaries easier without sacrificing your compassion. Again, that's boundariesthatfeelgood.com. Okay, let's get back to the show. That's so amazing. I love being inspired by the desire to help other people. So I understand you also do provide coaching services. Tell me a little bit more about those.
Sure, sure. Most of my work is keynotes and group workshops, but
Okay.
I do also like to work with particularly executives and professionals, because I think a lot of leadership and professional development neglects the self leadership part. We're always talking about, well, how do we impact other people? How do we get other people to do what we want? When the first question is, how do we get ourselves to do what we want? How do we stay in alignment with that? Because really, I've found that the best leaders that I've ever worked with and for are the ones that are the most in mastery of themselves. They're the ones that are able to find that calm presence and establish that psychological safety and encouragement for those that they are leading. So my coaching with leaders and executives and professionals really focuses first on getting them aligned with living each day the way that they really want to, working on the things that are most important to them, conserving and generating the energy that they need for those tasks in order to be the best leaders. So I work with folks one-on-one, both virtually. If they're in the Austin area, I can also meet in person. But a lot of times also I'll do leadership workshops with small groups as well as follow-ons to my keynotes. And really, we can do quarterly meetings as well and check-ins to see how things are going, because so much of it is yeah, it's great to help someone in a particular session or a particular day, an event. But like so much of life, what I used to say when I taught a self-defense course, it's meaningless unless you practice it every day so it becomes automatic. So it's there when you need it. So a lot of my coaching is those check-ins and the accountability. It's seeing if we are doing the work for ourselves, that usually is what gets shifted to very last place, but trying to bump it up in place so that it's the place we can start and work on it to be in power and present for the people we're trying to help.
How do you find that? I mean, I can kind of visualize it abstractly, but how do you find that the skills involved in developing self-leadership translate to leading others?
I think it comes to a matter, I think the head of it is presence.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is not necessarily the way people talk about presence, like just stage presence or executive presence. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about presence being fully there in the moment, for yourself and for others. That's how the best communication happens. That's how you're able to focus on what's important in that moment, to take action in that moment, to focus on the process that you control versus the outcome that you may not control. So there's in all of these ways, when you can learn to practice those things for yourself, you also make it easier for others to see that, to feel that, to start practicing it themselves. And when everyone is fully present together, rather than thinking about, okay, what is this potential consequence? Or what did I mess up in the past? We're staying together present in that moment where we can actually take action, where we can actually communicate, when we can build relationships and networks and projects and the things that we're trying to do and move them into the future with us.
Awesome. That makes sense. Do you do any like team building exercises that are like physically involved?
Yes, I
Yeah?
do. I do. One of the fun add-ons I do for my keynotes is I have a boxing empowerment workshop. Most people who take it, they've never done any boxing or martial arts in their life, and it's a non-contact practice as well, because you can learn to throw a punch without actually having to hit anything, but you can learn to throw it properly, and it's an amazing mind-body connection of watching people give themselves permission to throw a real punch. So much of, particularly as women, growing up in society, we're taught to be nice and not to assert ourselves and to go along with the group. But doing the mental work to give yourself that permission to say, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this assertive thing. I'm going to throw a punch like I mean it, is incredible mental work, and it happens very, very quickly. So I love to do a basic boxing workshop as an add-on when we're doing either self-leadership, or I have another signature keynote I call Game Changers, is where the team is able to outperform the plan together. So I add on this boxing empowerment workshop because not only does it teach you something important about yourself, but it's a great bonding exercise because everyone is doing something that feels scary and unfamiliar together, and everyone ends up clapping for each other and supporting each other, interacting in ways that build that psychological safety together, which is the core, I think, of really great teamwork, is knowing that you can trust someone not just to be kind to you, but to be there if you do falter, and to give you ideas and help you up. So I think that is my favorite thing to do as an add-on, is actually that physical movement of the boxing workshop.
That's awesome. And it's also very presencing. And then it's this kind of co-regulation in a sense as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful. Along the lines of team building as well, there's something just really frustratingly fascinating to me about just interacting with other humans and how sometimes we wish we could control them. We want to get people to like do what we wanted them to do, and typically so that we can feel however we want to feel. Um, and that's something that actually comes up a lot. It's like a what do you call it? Like a re-education that I have to do with clients sometimes to help them learn like what boundaries are and what they're not. And I think a lot of people think that boundaries can be a way to like kind of control other people. Like, hey, I told you that this is not okay, and you're supposed to change your behavior instead of like, hey, this is what I need to do for me. Where do you find some of that nuance in terms of that self-ownership and self-leadership in also in interaction with others?
Yeah, it's big, I think, both social and learned limiting belief that boundaries are bad.
Mhm, yeah.
It means you don't want to help other people, you don't care about other people, and helping folks to understand that boundaries aren't about controlling other people's behavior, they're about controlling yours. They are how you ensure that you are not betraying yourself.
Mm,
That's the biggest thing that boundaries do is that they are a set of guidelines that keep you where you want to be and keep you from bending those rules to serve other people at your own cost, as a cost of abandoning yourself, your goals, your feelings, your welfare. So helping people to understand that boundaries, first of all, they're not aggressive. They're not negative. What they are is your kindest move for yourself so that you don't betray yourself, your values, and your needs to put other people ahead of your real and important choices and values. So I also talk about boundaries. I use a lot of analogies, but I talk about boundaries like bumpers in a bowling alley where, your goal is to get to those pins at the end of the alley, and a boundary just makes sure you're staying in that lane, the lane where you want to be. It's not controlling anyone in any other lane. They can continue to do exactly what they want to do. It's only keeping you in your lane. That's what you're concerned about. And so it's saying yes again. It's saying yes to what you want. I want to get to the end of that lane. I want to hit those pins down. I don't want to throw my ball into another lane. I don't want to make my efforts useless in the gutter, which is where most of my bowling balls end up. But it's a way to say like this is again, a boundary is a yes to myself. It is caring for myself, is making sure that I'm not trying to pour from an empty cup,
mhm,
or causing this really painful cognitive dissonance of where I know who I want to be, how I want to feel, and yet I'm doing and saying and allowing things that counter that. So that's the biggest thing about boundaries for me, is that sort of re-education, like you're talking about, that it's not for anyone else, it's for you. Boundaries are for you. They can do whatever they're going to do. You can never control what someone else is going to do. They have a choice to make just like you. But when you set a boundary, you are making that choice for yourself.
absolutely. I like that analogy. The one that I typically visualize is like a canyon.
Mhm.
It's like the boundaries are the canyon wall, and then the river is your sort of authentic creative expression. And so I like to say that, boundaries provide the supports for your life to flow in alignment with your values and goals. So not only is that bowling lane like the goal that you're going for, but it's also that alignment with your values. But the thing I like about the bowling alley analogy is that it brings to mind that yeah, there are others around you too, and your intention is to just stay in your lane, so to speak.
Yeah.
You mentioned though that sometimes people have this story that the boundaries are mean,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, I think one of the places where that gets reinforced a lot is on the other side. So when someone wants something from us that's not aligned with our values and goals, and we have to say no, then the other person gives us some sort of guilt trip, like, I want to hit your pins. Let me hit your pins, and you're like, no. And then they're like, how could you do this to me? Why are you denying me this thing? And the arm twisting and the guilt tripping can be so hard to stay in that. I call it stewardship. Like, we have to
Yeah.
steward our resources, and I use that term really broadly, like time, money, energy, attention, but also like interest. Like, are you interested in this? Is it within your capacity for today? Like, maybe it was yesterday, maybe it's not in your capacity today. Um, but that oxygen mask rule is so that we can stay resourced to show up for what matters most. And sometimes it's going to mean disappointing people along the way. And we really have to have what I call an internally rooted security in order to like brave the risk of judgment, rejection, abandonment from others, and just deal with the discomfort of their discomfort with their disappointment. And that can definitely be another challenge on the journey.
Yeah, it's a big challenge. I've struggled with that a lot. It's been a very long time coming for me to be comfortable with my no. I mean, part of it is I'm going to be 49, and a gift, I think, of your upper 40s, along with perimenopause, is I'm much more comfortable saying no to things now. It takes practice, it sure does. But realizing that not only is your energy limited, but it is valuable. It's another thing that I really like about what Taylor Swift has said about your energy is expensive and not everyone can afford it. That you want to save that energy for yourself. And when someone else is playing the guilt trip card, the if you loved me, you would card, trying to see that for the manipulation that it is, and see that that is someone who is placing their needs above your own. And that's no better than you placing your needs above theirs. You're entitled to do that. They're entitled to do that, but you don't have to play along. They don't have to play along with you. They can be in their own lane. But them wanting to invade yours and take over your agency and your self leadership, you should see that as what I think is it's an act of war that it is. It is an aggressive invasion of your autonomy, and that's not kind. That's
Yeah.
not loving.
Yeah.
And so understanding that you're not bad for having having boundaries, for having a border on what you will allow an aggressor to do to you, to take over, is not a bad thing. It is a proud thing that no, you know what? I value myself enough that I'm going to hear what you're saying. I'm going to tell you that I don't agree. And that can be a full statement as well.
Yeah. One of my favorites is, and honestly, this is still kind of aspirational. I think I'm getting better at it though. And I don't always, well, in fact, I don't think I've ever actually stated it this way, but it's the concept, the framing. When someone is, giving me a little bit of, I call it a boundary pushback, they're giving me a little bit of a hard time. It's essentially, I'm sorry you're disappointed. Would you like to talk about that? Like, because I don't I don't tend to default to seeing it as an aggression or an act of war. And oftentimes, my sort of fawning default wiring is like, I do want to maintain the connection, but learning that I don't have to cave on my boundary, nor do I have to, sever the connection. I can stay in connection, but my choice has been made, and that's not up for discussion. But we can talk about how you're feeling about it if you want. And of course, most people who are going to test a boundary like that aren't generally willing to be vulnerable enough to sit and talk with you about it, but they might, and it's a gracious counteroffer, and maybe it'll at least plant a seed for them, later or something.
I, I have no qualms about using diplomacy, and that is lovely, and that is caring. It's saying, look, I'm going to do what I've said I'm going to do, but I do care about how you feel.
Yeah, yeah. It's not going to make me change what I'm doing, but
Yeah.
I can hold your hand.
Yeah, I can hold your hand. If there's a misunderstanding that is the reason why you feel that way, let's clear that up.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
we can be in community and still have different goals.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I like that idea, and I do appreciate diplomacy. I work on my own fawning instinct as well, because someone said something today that I heard that I really, really loved, talking about how a lot of people think of peace as the absence of conflict
Mm.
instead of the presence of justice.
Hmm.
And I think it's very, very easy for us fawners to just go right to, we want to get rid of the conflict. And the easiest, fastest way to do is just to give in.
Yep. Give them what
But
they want.
when we take that off, when we say no, I'm going to insist on peace as justice,
Mm.
justice for myself, not betraying myself, but still engage in the diplomacy of, I still care about our connection.
Hmm.
And I'm willing to engage to support that connection, even
Hmm.
if my actions or my boundaries are different. I think that's a beautiful thing.
I think that what motivates those types of solutions for me is not just my value of peace and connection, but also because for me and other people pleasers, fawners, or recovering people pleasers, as I like to call us, um, is part of what keeps us stuck in the pattern is the idea of going to war feels like a bridge too far sometimes. And so having these like stepping stones that make it feel less scary, like, oh, I can stay boundaried and stay in connection. Like that feels so much more accessible. So I
Yeah.
like providing those types of tools. And the second reason, though, is that it's kind of what you were talking about with like self-leadership being the foundation for leading others. I feel like self-love is the foundation for loving others, and also like how we love others is how we love ourselves. And so when we get really adversarial with other people, it can be a bit of a like an operating system that might show up with our relationship with ourselves somewhere else. And so when we can have that sort of like compassionate boundary, and maybe it shows up later with like a boundary with ourselves, like I can't watch another episode, I really need to go to bed so that I have enough sleep and rest and that I can show up for what matters to me tomorrow. And then I can have a little conversation with myself and just be like, hey, I get it, I know that this is really exciting, and you're into the drama of the story and you want to see what happens next, but like, let's just go brush our teeth and like take a break, pause give a little bit of space from the dopamine, and just finding gentle ways to interact with myself and also gentle ways to interact with others so that it becomes this like fluid operating system.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that. Another perspective that I think your approach to is really aligned with is approaching this kind of difference or potential conflict with curiosity,
Mm,
instead of judgment, either
mm,
for yourself or for the other person. Is what you said is tell me how you're feeling about it, why you're feeling this way. That's curiosity, and that I think at its core is love based,
yeah.
whereas judgment can be a much harder thing both to receive and to give. It doesn't feel as good as compassion and curiosity and developing understanding. So I think that's a beautiful thing. I will say also, one of the things that combat sports has helped me to develop, and again, this is the transfer, I think, between the physical, the activity, and the brain not recognizing that it's different in another context, is that when you are training in a combat sport, you start to internalize that conflict doesn't mean hate. Like you don't hate everyone that you're punching in practice. You really, if you do, it's a problem. You need to investigate that. But I call them, a lot of my training partners have become my closest friends. I call them my PFFs, my punch face friends. Um, because you are training, you are in conflict, you are trying to get the better of each other so that you can personally be your best. But it doesn't involve hate. It doesn't involve necessarily like an aggressive interpersonal way of being. You are aggressive in the sport, but it's not with judgment. It's with curiosity. I wonder if I can do that. I wonder how I can counter this, rather than I hate you because you threw that and I hate you because of this. It doesn't enter into it. It's all about the curiosity and the fluidity and the sport of it. And so I think having that experience in one area of my life was a huge advantage to understanding and starting to work on bringing that into my interpersonal relationships, where conflict doesn't mean bad, it doesn't mean hate, it simply means difference. And that when you can approach it that way, rather than oh no, there's conflict, must end immediately, it means something horrible is wrong. That was a huge step forward, but it does take a little bit of consciously remembering that and trying to practice that in the moment, which is difficult in that
Yeah,
moment.
yeah. In fact, that's why when I start working with people, I don't bother to talk a lot about it in like marketing and whatnot, because it's not what lands for people in their lived experience. But the very first, most foundational thing that I always teach is developing an awareness practice, because you have to strengthen that muscle in order to be able to stay where you can access your conscious choice instead of fall into those reactive impulses. Because once you get triggered, your mind dumps these chemicals into your body and you kind of get hijacked and you go on autopilot.
Yeah.
And that's part of why it's so hard to maintain that awareness in the moment, especially in those heated moments. And so developing an awareness practice is so essential to be able to stay conscious of what's happening to you and catch it before you get hijacked. It's really
Yeah.
important.
I talk about it often like being in a runaway carriage.
Yeah.
Before you can do anything, right now, your hormones and your neurotransmitters have hijacked your executive function. You literally cannot think well when you're in that alarm state. And so, developing a practice where you can get control of those reins again, those runaway horses, and get some of that executive function back is so important. There's a lot of really great breathing exercises you can do. My favorite one is that physiological sigh exercise, because it's the simplest and I don't have to count for too long. Um, but anything that helps bring you back, get grounded back in your body, and start to bring some calm so that you can bring your brain back into the conversation is a huge benefit. I love that you start with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hand in hand with awareness is also non-judgment. We talked about that earlier. And
Mhm.
because it's as you start growing your awareness, not only in that muscle, but you start learning more about yourself. It becomes kind of introspective. You start seeing things about you, and you'll see some things you don't like about you. You'll notice that, like, oh my gosh, how long have I been doing this stupid pattern? And then you start to judge yourself. And then that just actually really blocks the growth and transformation. So bringing non-judgment into it's also really important. And tying that in with, you said the runaway carriage, living in Texas now for the last almost 13 years. There's a fun, say that sarcastically, thing that we often have to do is if you miss your exit on a freeway, you are very likely to actually just end up on another freeway that is going to take you on this like 2-mile detour to get back to where you were trying to go. And there's a there's like a phase in the process of growth and development as we're building this awareness practice and we start to notice ourselves doing things where we used to take that exit unconsciously. And we would have that whole physiological response and we would go through this whole dysfunctional pattern. But as the awareness starts developing, at first you'll start to notice it after the fact. You'll be like, oh, I just did a whole pointless detour. And then like it's almost like in the timeline, your awareness starts to get sooner and sooner. And there's a really frustrating piece that I love bringing some awareness to and like giving voice to and letting people know that it's a natural phase and it's frustrating as hell and you just have to keep going and go through it. But there's a phase where you're not catching it early enough, but you're awake and conscious and you're watching yourself go on this detour and you're like, oh my gosh, like I can't, it's like you can't quite control yourself yet, but you're seeing yourself do it and you're like, what is wrong with me? And there can be a lot of shame that can come in there. And I just encourage anyone listening to, do you know what? The shame's part of the ride too. It's an inevitable part of it. And just try and be as gentle with yourself as you can. And you just keep doing it. And eventually you'll get the awareness to the point where you can catch yourself before that exit happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the shame is part of self-love, which is you want better for yourself. You expect better for yourself.
Sure.
But for me, reminding myself in a compassionate way that when we know better, we do better.
Yeah.
And not using hindsight and 2020 hindsight to be judging ourselves for what we didn't know or we weren't prepared or didn't have the support in the past to do. Now we know better, we can try better. We
Yes.
can do better.
Even though
And
it's going to take a few tries, even
it,
though
yeah,
you can know better and keep doing the old things, it
yeah,
won't be forever. You will continue to practice and you will get better at it.
absolutely. And not to bring everything back to sports psychology, but I'm
Mhm.
gonna. Um,
Go for
that failure is such a key part of success in everything, but particularly in sport too. Like when you're learning to shoot a free throw, like you're gonna throw a lot of balls up there that don't go in the net, and you just accept that. You don't judge yourself for it. You're like, oh, okay, this is what I did with my hand that time. This is what I did with my feet that time. And you learn to view failure with the compassion of this is all part of me practicing getting better so that I can make it in that basket. So next time I can take that exit when I see it coming. It's just part of the practice and loving the process, accepting that failure is just a part of getting better, I think is a huge help in getting our minds around that process of just practicing so that we are more likely to do what we want to do in the future, rather than what we know we didn't enjoy doing in the past.
it. Absolutely. And tying that back into conflict before, when you were talking about conflict, there's a wonderful book, and I love the title of it. It's called Conflict Equals Energy.
Yeah.
And I like that framing as well because, again, those of us coming from that sort of fawn or people pleaser, and conflict can be so scary and it can get us to cave just to get rid of it. But when you see that conflict is just energy and we judge it as bad and uncomfortable. I mean, it is uncomfortable, but we judge that as bad, and it can just be like, hey, there's something here. There's a lot of energy here. And how can we sort of, I love using the analogy of like Aikido, like how can we redirect this energy in like a productive way? And it doesn't have to be something to like squash. Um, so I think that that's a really valuable thing to learn. I think one of the most important elements of developing a healthy boundary practice is sure there's all of that internal, reconnecting, but then there's also a lot of communication skills that are involved and learning how to reconnect to your yes, learning how to root your security within so that you can brave those scary things. And it's also like strength training in terms of like your internal capacity, like you said. And in fact, doing physical muscular strength training can help with that capacity for discomfort. And building all of that is so important. And being reconnected to your body as well, I think is one of the biggest values on this particular journey of personal development and interpersonal skills is that it helps you be able to discern between safe and unsafe discomfort. because we
Mhm.
have such a tendency to lean into things that we think it's maybe beneficial or for our growth or for the best or whatever story we tell ourselves, but it's really just repeating familiar patterns, and we will avoid the discomforts that actually are good for us because it's just new and it's scary. But anyway, being able to feel into the differences of that, I think you have to be embodied for that to happen. Um, and so I just like dumped out a whole giant other conversation or several conversations, but just in the essence of respecting time for our listeners and for you today, maybe we'll start to wrap this one up.
Okay.
I know you've got that book coming out. Tell us again what it's called, and you have a lot of wonderful things to offer the world. Where can our listeners find you and learn more about you and all of
Thank you very much. Well, yeah, I could talk with you all day,
that?
Mariah.
For sure.
We have so many overlaps. It's such a pleasure. My book is called Fierce Agency: How to Be the Best Leader You've Ever Had. My pre-sale has been going on now. I think by the time this airs, it will be over. But there are going to be opportunities to buy the book. Right now, it's in production. It will be fully published next fall, and I'll have book tour events as well. But if you want to be part of my journey, get some early excerpts, maybe even help me pick a cover, you can connect with me at my website. It's thelegalathlete.com. Or you can find me, Jess Sargus, on LinkedIn and send me a message, or Jess at thelegalathlete.com. You can email me. I'll get your email on that list, and you'll be informed of all of the book launch and book tour and purchasing opportunities. Or if you'd like to have me come and speak at a keynote or investigate coaching, those are the great ways to contact me as well: website, email, and LinkedIn.
Perfect. Thank you so much for all of that. And thank you again for this conversation. Perhaps we'll do another one day.
I hope so. I hope so. This has been a real pleasure. I love talking with you, your important work.
Mhm.
So thank you so much, Mariah, for having me.
And thank you so much for tuning in. What a cool story. Again, if you would like to learn more about Jess, follow the links in the show notes. If you would like to learn more about working with me and focusing on developing healthy boundaries, especially if you're a recovering people pleaser, you can go to explorelovingboundaries.com to schedule a better boundaries breakthrough call with me. Or if, you're not sure about me yet, it's a little too much too soon, you can also go to boundariesthatfeelgood.com and download a jam-packed PDF with a full breakdown of the Gates method that I mentioned, as well as some really helpful tools for grounding and embodiment, a powerful perspective shift on the truth about being helpful, and it even includes a few really helpful scripts to use for honoring your boundaries. And while you're here, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share this show so we can spread the love. And wherever you're at on your journey, I send you so much love and courage. Namaste.